The move to Massachusetts was a difficult but necessary decision. After the tragic death of my husband Jack, the pain of reliving the happy moments we had in our old house was unbearable. Additionally, I secured a new job as head nurse at a renowned hospital, which meant growth and stability opportunities for me and my daughter, Lily. The new house was a Victorian building located on a quiet, tree-lined street, surrounded by equally charming residences. The neighbors seemed friendly, with warm waves and genuine smiles. There was an old-world charm in the neighborhood, as if each house held stories from the past. Lily, 6 years old, ran across the front lawn, her laughter echoing in the sunny afternoon. For her, the move seemed like an exciting adventure. As I entered the house for the first time, I felt a mixture of relief and melancholy. The wooden floorboards creaked under my feet, and the smell of fresh paint mixed with the scent of the pine trees in the garden. The house was spacious, with large windows that let the sunlight flood the rooms. Lily ran through the hallways, exploring every corner with childlike enthusiasm. It's bigger than I imagined, I thought while unpacking. There was much to be done to turn the house into a home, but I was determined to move forward. On a sunny Saturday, Lily and I decided to explore the town. We walked through the historic center, enchanted by the quaint shops and preserved architecture. That's when we spotted a small antique shop, nestled between a cafe and a bookstore. The shop had a modest facade with a wooden sign that read, "Treasures of Time." As we entered, a soft bell tinkled above the door, announcing our arrival. The interior was filled with old furniture, dusty paintings, and shelves crammed with trinkets and curiosities. The smell of aged wood and old books lingered in the air. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with piercing eyes and an enigmatic smile, emerged from behind a counter. His name was Mr. Whitaker. "Welcome to my shop. Can I help you find something special?" he asked in a hoarse but welcoming voice. Lily, with her curious eyes, began exploring the shop. Her small fingers glided over figurines and music boxes. Then she saw the doll. It was sitting in a tiny rocking chair, wearing a blue lace dress and curly brown hair. Its glass eyes seemed to follow Lily's movements. "Mommy, look at this doll!" Lily exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. I approached and looked at the doll. There was something strangely familiar about it, an uncomfortable feeling I couldn't identify. Nevertheless, my daughter's smile convinced me. "How much for this doll?" I asked Mr. Whitaker. "Oh, this is a unique piece," he replied, with an enigmatic gleam in his eyes. "But for the young lady, I'll make a special price." He smiled, and I couldn't help but notice a tone of mystery in his voice. I bought the doll, thinking it would be the perfect welcome gift for Lily. We left the shop with the doll in Lily's arms, who couldn't stop smiling. However, as we walked back home, a slight feeling of unease began to settle in my heart, like a shadow I couldn't explain. In the first few days after buying the doll, Lily seemed happier than ever. She took it everywhere, even to the dining table. I thought it was just a child's excitement with a new toy. However, things began to change. One night, I woke up startled by a strange sound coming from Lily's room. I got up and walked down the dark hallway, the wooden floor creaking under my feet. When I opened her bedroom door, the dim light from the lamp cast eerie shadows on the walls. Lily was sitting on the bed, whispering to the doll, as if it were listening attentively. "Lily, are you okay?" I asked, trying to sound calm. She turned to me, her sleepy eyes still fixed on the doll. "I'm telling her about Daddy," she said, her voice sweet and innocent. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I brushed it off, thinking it was just a child's fertile imagination. In the following days, strange things started happening around the house. Objects moved without explanation. Lily's teddy bear appeared in the hallway, far from her room, doors closed by themselves, with a click that echoed through the house. At night, I heard whispers and muffled laughter, but when I got up to check, everything was silent. One day, while I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, I heard a loud sound coming from the living room. I ran to see what had happened and found one of the ceramic vases I had placed on the shelf broken on the floor. Lily was sitting on the sofa, holding the doll in her lap with a blank, distant look. "Lily, what happened?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "She said she didn't like the vase," Lily replied, with a naturalness that sent chills down my spine. "Who, dear?" "The doll, Mommy. She doesn't like many things." I began to feel a growing unease. It wasn't just Lily's behavior that was changing. It was the atmosphere of the house. There was a feeling of oppression, as if something invisible was watching us. More and more, I found Lily whispering to the doll in a conspiratorial tone that chilled my blood. One night, after putting Lily to bed, I was passing through the living room when I heard a soft laugh. I stopped immediately and turned to see where the sound was coming from. The doll was sitting in the armchair, its enigmatic smile on its porcelain face, looking more sinister under the faint moonlight coming through the window. My heart pounded in my chest. I began to question my sanity. Was I imagining things? The house, the doll, everything seemed to have an aura of evil. I didn't know what to do, but one thing was certain. I needed to discover the origin of that doll and understand what was happening to my daughter before something worse happened. Weeks passed, and Lily's behavior became increasingly alarming. The once peaceful nights turned into scenes of terror. Lily began having constant nightmares. She woke up screaming in the middle of the night, sweaty and crying, clutching the doll with an almost desperate grip. "She won't let me sleep, Mommy," Lily said, her eyes wide with fear. "She shows me horrible things." I tried to comfort her, but nothing seemed to work. Every time I tried to take the doll from her arms, Lily clung to it tighter, as if it were a matter of life or death. Mornings were equally difficult. Lily began saying disturbing things, phrases a 6-year-old shouldn't know. "Lily, where did you hear that?" I asked, one day after she said something horrible about death and blood. "She told me," Lily replied, pointing to the doll. Verbal aggression soon turned into physical aggression. One day, while I was trying to comb Lily's hair, she pushed me with unexpected force, making me stumble and fall. Her eyes, once so sweet, were filled with inexplicable fury. "You don't understand anything," she shouted, hugging the doll to her chest. "She told me you're bad." I was in shock. I had never seen my daughter act that way. I decided I needed to seek help. I talked to Lily's teacher, Miss Henson, who was also concerned. "Mrs. Bennett, Lily's behavior has changed drastically in recent weeks," said Miss Henson. "She has been aggressive with her classmates and said very disturbing things. The other students are afraid of her." Talking to Miss Henson only increased my worry. Even Lily's classmates had noticed the change. I knew I had to do something before the situation got worse. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I decided to investigate the doll further. I carefully took it from Lily's hands while she slept, hoping she wouldn't wake up. I went to the living room and began examining the doll under the strong light of the lamp. Its glass eyes seemed to follow me, and its enigmatic smile seemed to mock me. I remembered Mr. Whitaker and the antique shop. Something about that doll was definitely wrong, and I needed to find out what. I put the doll back in Lily's room, feeling a shiver run down my spine as I placed it on the chair next to the bed. I decided that the next day I would go back to the shop and confront Mr. Whitaker. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Something was corrupting my daughter, and I would do anything to protect her. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts were filled with disturbing images of Lily and the doll. The next morning, after dropping Lily off at school, I began my investigation. First, I went to the city library. The librarian, a kind woman named Margaret, helped me search old records. I spent hours immersed in dusty books and yellowed newspapers. I found some vague reports about cursed dolls, but nothing concrete about the specific doll I had bought. Without finding satisfactory answers, I decided to return to the antique shop. As I entered, the doorbell tinkled softly, and Mr. Whitaker appeared, his enigmatic smile intact. "Ah, Mrs. Bennet, how is your daughter?" he asked in a voice that made me uncomfortable. "She's not well," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I want to know more about the doll I bought here." Mr. Whitaker frowned for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. "That doll has an interesting history," he said, guiding me to a corner of the shop where the counter was. "It was made in the late 19th century by a craftsman named Elias Cartwright. They say he put a part of his soul into each doll he created." "Part of his soul?" I asked, incredulous. "Yes," he replied with a somber tone. "Elias lost his daughter, and in his grief, he began creating dolls that he believed would keep her essence alive. But some of these dolls carried more than just love. They carried despair, hatred, and in some cases, something much more sinister." I left the shop with more questions than answers. I decided to visit the public archive to look for more information about Elias Cartwright. I spent hours there, searching through documents and old records. Finally, I found something that made my blood run cold. There were records of several families who owned dolls made by Elias. All these families faced inexplicable tragedies, sudden deaths, disappearances, and violent behaviors. One entire family died in a mysterious fire. Another was found dead in their beds, with no signs of a struggle. I returned home with a heavy heart. The doll's history was unfolding to be much darker than I could have imagined. I needed to protect Lily, but how? The information I had gathered was terrifying, but I was still missing a crucial detail: how to break the doll's connection to my daughter. Lying in bed that night, I again heard the whispers and muffled laughter coming from Lily's room. I got up and went there, finding my daughter talking to the doll, her eyes shining in the dim light of the lamp. "Lily, who are you talking to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "To the doll's friend, Mommy. She said she wants to stay with me forever." Those words were the last straw. The next day, I decided to seek help from a specialist. It was the only way to save my daughter and destroy the curse that haunted us. The next morning, determined to find a solution, I searched for a specialist who could help uncover the dark secrets of the doll. That's how I found the name Richard Mallory, a local historian specializing in antique and cursed artifacts. They said he knew everything about Massachusetts' darkest artifacts. I contacted him, and to my surprise, he was receptive and curious about my situation. We arranged a meeting for that afternoon at his house, which also served as a small museum of old and occult artifacts. When I arrived, Richard's house was exactly as I imagined: an old Victorian mansion filled with books and relics that seemed to have come out of a horror story. Richard, a middle-aged man with gray hair and round glasses, greeted me with a firm handshake and an investigative look. "Mrs. Bennet, it's a pleasure to meet you. Please come in," he said, leading me to a room filled with shelves crammed with old books and showcases full of curious objects. "Thank you, Mr. Mallory," I replied, sitting in a squeaky leather armchair. "I'm here because I needed your help to understand the origin of a doll I recently bought." Richard nodded, listening attentively as I described the disturbing events that had been happening since the doll entered our house. When I finished, he got up and took a large leather-bound book from one of the shelves. "Elias Cartwright, he said, carefully flipping through the pages. A well-known name in certain circles. He was a talented craftsman, but also a disturbed man after his daughter's death. He delved into the occult, seeking ways to keep her presence alive. Richard stopped on a page and showed me an illustration of a doll that looked eerily familiar. Cartwright used occult rituals to infuse his dolls with parts of his daughter's essence. He believed that in this way he could keep her soul close to him, but these dolls became vehicles for something much darker. Something darker? I asked, feeling a chill down my spine. Yes, Richard replied, with a grave look. Cartwright performed rituals involving sacrifices and invocations. The dolls not only contained his daughter's essence, but also became portals for evil spirits. Every family that owned one of these dolls faced inexplicable tragedies. My heart was pounding as I absorbed this information. And what can I do to protect my daughter and get rid of this doll? Richard closed the book and sighed. The only way to break the doll's connection to your daughter is to perform a purification ritual. The doll must be destroyed, but this must be done very carefully to avoid releasing the entity trapped in it. He explained the details of the ritual, which included specific elements and recitations in Latin. I would need the help of someone experienced in exorcisms to ensure the spirit was banished safely. I left Richard's house with a mix of hope and fear. Now, I knew what needed to be done, but the idea of performing a purification ritual terrified me. However, I would do anything to protect my daughter. The next step would be to find an exorcist willing to face the evil that inhabited that doll. Things started to get worse quickly. Lily's behavior became increasingly violent and uncontrollable. Her outbursts of rage were more frequent and frightening. She yelled, threw objects, and even physically attacked me. Her look, once innocent and sweet, now carried a malice that didn't seem to belong to a 6-year-old. "You don't understand anything," Lily screamed one morning when I tried to take the doll from her hands. Her eyes were full of hatred. "She said she'll hurt you if you try." Her words were like daggers to my heart. With each passing day, I felt the dark presence intensify in the house. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and the room temperatures dropped abruptly without explanation. I started seeing dark figures out of the corner of my eye, always disappearing when I tried to focus on them. One night, while I was in the living room trying to calm myself with a cup of tea, I heard a loud noise coming from upstairs. I ran to Lily's room and found all her toys scattered on the floor as if they had been thrown with force. The doll was sitting on the bed, its glass eyes seeming to glow in the darkness. "Lily, what happened here?" I asked, trying to hide the panic in my voice. "She doesn't like the other toys," Lily replied, with an apathetic tone that didn't suit her. That same night, I woke up in the middle of the night with an overwhelming sense of dread. A dark figure was standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me. I tried to move, scream, but my body was paralyzed. Finally, the figure disappeared, and I was able to move again, panting and with my heart racing. Paranormal events intensified. Doors slammed shut with force. Lights flickered, and I heard threatening whispers in the middle of the night. Once, while in the bathroom, the mirror fogged up, and words appeared written in the steam. "She is ours." I knew I had to act fast. Each moment that passed, the doll's malevolent influence over Lily grew stronger. I resolved that the next day I would seek an exorcist. However, that night held another terror for me. As I tried to sleep, I heard a sinister laugh echoing through the house. I ran to Lily's room and found her standing by the bed, holding the doll in her arms. The room was cold, and a huge shadow seemed to loom on the wall behind her. "Mommy, she said you can't separate us," Lily said in a voice that wasn't hers. It was a deep, malicious voice. I was paralyzed with fear, not knowing what to do. I needed help, and I needed it fast. I grabbed my phone and with trembling hands dialed Richard Mallory's number. "Mr. Mallory, I need your help immediately," I said, my voice choked with panic. "The situation is out of control. Lily, she is possessed by the doll." "Calm down, Mrs. Bennett," Richard replied urgently. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Stay strong and stay with Lily, but don't try to take the doll from her. We need to do this correctly to avoid worse consequences." I hung up the phone, trying to calm myself. Each second felt like an eternity as I waited. The laughter, whispers, and shadows continued to haunt the house. I could only hope that Richard would arrive in time to help save my daughter from the evil consuming her. After the terrifying events of that night, I knew I needed help. Richard did everything he could, but we were facing something far beyond our capabilities. We needed an exorcist or a specialist in paranormal phenomena. I began my desperate search. I spent days making calls and sending emails, but most of the people I contacted refused to help. Many claimed they didn't want to get involved in such dangerous cases, while others seemed like charlatans, more interested in money than offering real help. The situation was desperate. Each time I returned home without a solution, the dark atmosphere seemed to intensify. Then, on a sleepless night, I found a reference to Father Jonathan Reed on an online paranormal phenomena forum. He had a controversial past, being removed from the church after a tragic incident that resulted in the death of a young girl during an exorcism. Even so, many reports claimed he was one of the few with true power to deal with malevolent forces. I contacted him hesitantly, and to my surprise, he agreed to speak with me. We arranged a meeting in a small abandoned chapel on the outskirts of the city. When I arrived, the sight of the chapel gave me chills, but I entered determined. "Father Reed, thank you for meeting me," I said, trying to stay calm. He was a tall man with gray hair and deep eyes that seemed to carry the weight of many secrets. His face was severe, but there was a hidden kindness in his gaze. "Mrs. Bennett, I understand you are desperate, but you need to know that this kind of evil is dangerous and unpredictable. I will help, but you must follow my instructions to the letter." "I'll do whatever it takes to save my daughter," I replied, feeling a glimmer of hope. Father Reed nodded. "First, I need to see the doll and the child. This will help me understand what we're dealing with." I returned home with a mix of relief and apprehension. When I arrived, Lily was in her room, hugging the doll, her eyes fixed on an invisible point on the wall. The atmosphere in the house seemed heavier than ever. The next day, Father Reed came to our house. As soon as he entered, I felt a change in the energy of the place. He examined Lily from a distance, his face showing growing concern. "The presence here is strong," he said, turning to me. "This doll carries a very powerful entity. We need to act quickly, but this won't be easy. I'll need time to prepare everything." Despite the growing fear, I agreed. He explained that it would take a few days to gather the materials and prepare the exorcism ritual. The wait would be agonizing, but I had no choice. Meanwhile, Richard and I would do everything possible to protect Lily and keep the entity under control. The nights that followed were pure terror. The shadows on the walls seemed to come to life, and the whispers in the dark were almost unbearable. Lily became more distant, her outbursts of rage more violent. I knew time was running out, but I had to trust that Father Reed would be able to help us. The days leading up to the exorcism were filled with intense preparations and growing anxiety. Father Reed instructed me on the materials we would need: holy water, consecrated candles, crucifixes, and protective amulets. The atmosphere in the house was increasingly oppressive, as if the house itself was aware of what was to come. On the day of the ritual, Richard, Father Reed, and I gathered in the living room. Richard helped organize the space, placing candles in strategic points and drawing a protection circle on the floor with chalk. Father Reed was focused, murmuring prayers in Latin while preparing the final details. Lily was in her room, under the influence of the entity, hugging the doll. The sound of her sinister laughter echoed through the house, sending shivers down my spine. Every time we tried to approach her, we felt an invisible force repelling us. "It's time," said Father Reed, his voice firm but laden with tension. "Let's start the ritual." We entered Lily's room. The temperature dropped abruptly, the air becoming heavy and cold. Lily was sitting on the bed, her eyes fixed on us. But there was something deeply wrong in her gaze, a malice that wasn't hers. Father Reed began to chant the exorcism prayers, his voice reverberating through the room. Lily started to writhe, holding the doll tighter. "She won't leave," said a guttural voice that wasn't Lily's. "She is ours." The words were like a punch to the gut. My heart raced as I held a crucifix tightly. Richard, beside me, held a vial of holy water, ready to act. Father Reed intensified his prayers, and the entity inside Lily began to react violently. Suddenly, objects in the room started to move. Books flew off the shelves. Toys were thrown against the walls, and an invisible force tried to break the protection circle drawn on the floor. Richard and I struggled to stay calm, knowing any mistake could be fatal. "In the name of Christ, I command you to leave this child," Father Reed shouted, sprinkling holy water on Lily and the doll. Lily let out a high-pitched scream that turned into a sinister laugh. The entity was fighting fiercely, and each second felt like an eternity. In the midst of the chaos, a horrible truth began to emerge. The entity inside the doll wasn't just any evil spirit. It was part of Elias Cartwright himself, who, through his occult rituals, had linked his essence to the doll to live eternally. "He wants to be reborn," Richard murmured, his eyes wide with horror. "He's trying to use Lily as a vessel." My blood ran cold at the sound of that. We needed to stop the spirit's ritual before it was too late. Father Reed, realizing the gravity of the situation, increased the intensity of his prayers, his voice booming like thunder. The entity reacted more violently. The windows rattled, the floor seemed to pulsate, and an oppressive darkness began to envelop the room. The candlelight flickered, threatening to go out at any moment. I held Lily's hand, trying to convey some comfort, even though I was terrified. "Sarah, you need to talk to Lily," Father Reed shouted between prayers. "Try to bring her back." "Lily, dear, you need to fight. I'm here. Mommy is here," I said, my voice trembling but full of determination. "Don't let him control you." For a moment, I saw a glimmer of recognition in Lily's eyes. The entity was losing control, but it wasn't defeated yet. The battle was at its climax, and the tension was almost unbearable. Then, something changed. The entity began to scream, a voice full of hatred and despair. The room was engulfed by an invisible force trying to destroy everything around it. But Father Reed didn't waver. With one last powerful prayer, he commanded, "In the name of Christ, I expel you." The scream that echoed through the room was deafening, followed by a deadly silence. The battle was far from over, but we had taken a crucial step. Lily collapsed, unconscious, and the doll fell beside her, inert, but still carrying Elias Cartwright's malevolence. With the ritual interrupted, we had a small respite, but we knew it wasn't over yet. Darkness still loomed over us, and the battle to save my daughter was far from finished. The silence that followed the confrontation was oppressive. Father Reed was visibly exhausted, but determined to complete the ritual. Lily lay unconscious on the floor, the doll beside her looking like just an inert object. but we knew the battle wasn't over. "We must continue," said Father Reed, his voice tired but firm. "The entity is weakened, but still present. We need to expel it completely before it regains its strength." Richard and I helped reposition Lily in the center of the protection circle, while Father Reed prepared the final elements needed to complete the exorcism. The air was dense, charged with an electricity that made the hairs on our arms stand on end. "Let's begin," announced Father Reed, resuming the Latin prayers, now with renewed intensity. Richard and I recited prayers in unison, our voices echoing in the room. As the ritual progressed, Lily began to writhe again. Her eyes opened, but they weren't her eyes. They were black, void, like bottomless pits. The entity was fighting for its last chance of survival. "She is mine." The guttural voice came from Lily's mouth, but it wasn't hers. The entity was desperately trying to hold on to the last vestige of power. "No, she's not yours," I shouted, holding Lily's hand firmly. "Lily, fight. Fight against him. You are strong, dear. Mommy is here." Father Reed sprinkled more holy water, while the tension in the room reached its peak. Suddenly, a bright light emanated from the protection circle, as if a divine force was responding to our prayers. Lily let out a high-pitched scream, and then, as if a silent explosion occurred, the entity was expelled from her body. The doll, now clearly the receptacle of evil, began to tremble and crack. Father Reed wasted no time. He took the vial of holy water and poured the contents over the doll, reciting one last powerful prayer. The doll cracked completely, and from within it a black smoke emanated, quickly dissipating into the air. And then everything was quiet. Lily collapsed again, this time in a peaceful sleep. The house, which once felt like a living nightmare, was now at peace. The sense of oppression had disappeared, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe a sigh of relief. Father Reed wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at me, a slight smile of relief on his lips. "It's done. She is free." I ran to embrace Lily, tears of relief streaming down my face. "Thank you, Father Reed. I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need to thank me," he replied softly. "Just take good care of her." In the following days, life began to return to normal. Lily, although still fragile, was slowly recovering. She didn't remember the terrible events, and I was grateful for that. The doll, now in pieces, had been buried in a consecrated ground by Father Reed, ensuring its curse would never disturb another soul. Over time, I reflected on the events that had transformed our lives. The experience left us with scars, but it also taught us the strength of love and determination. I decided we needed a fresh start, away from the shadows that still loomed over our old house. So, I sold the house in Massachusetts and moved us to a small town in the countryside where no one knew our story. It was a new chance to rebuild our lives, free from the shackles of the past. Lily thrived in the new environment, her childlike joy slowly returning. I found peace in small things, the sound of Lily's laughter, the warmth of the sun on quiet afternoons, and the certainty that, no matter how dark it gets, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. As I watched Lily play in the garden of our new home, I promised myself that I would protect my daughter at all costs. We had faced hell and survived, and now, finally, we had a chance to live in peace. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to our channel and check out the next story that is playing on the screen.